Hello there, I'm Rick, and this is a document that I have used for years that I find that I bring forth and talk about the context and the patterns and to help to see why things are the way they are and how we can make it better together. So I call it what IT get to work with. And you probably know this triangle from other places, right? But I find that the urgency, the sense of urgency, the push makes it. We're not really all there. We're very much leaning towards the availability, towards the what's visible. The minimum viable product is very much focused on the minimum part. Ship, 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 ship. Show that you're working. Look like you're busy. Project managers cutting with a scissor on to get to that green in the status report with the to-do list and the rest notes and the other things moving into another project, the version 2, technical depth, all sacrificed for availability. And it's not just bad. Show your work is important. Get early feedback when we're talking about, for example, experiments and A/B testing, stuff like availability, of course, is really, really important. But I want to expand your mind a bit with the help, and this is a work in progress, even if I've had it for years. We're still learning together. So do make your own version. Make this better, please. People around you need it. But look at what happens when we're so focused on the availability and the minimum viable product. I hope the takeaway for you going through this is minimum viable product. Let's expand the viable. What does viable mean for the person, the user, the client, the customer we're here to serve? What does viable mean for them? Quite often the minimum thing isn't minimum viable. It needs to actually help the end user, it needs to actually help the paying customer. And it also needs to work for your organization. So you're training the right things, so you're staffing with people who want to learn that skill. So you're figuring out the strategy. What do we want to become better at? So it's viable in the future. So when you look at availability, think at the minimum viable product. And I love product focused, but it's so easy we stay too focused on the product and we forget what's viable for the end user. Because at the end, we're here to serve. And again, the availability is really important. Don't stay locked in working on strategy in PowerPoints, being way too far, with much too padding, much too calendar time goes before things are viable. That's not what I'm saying. Available is really, really important. But there's more to the equation than that's why, again, I say in this triad, it's such a heavy leaning into availability. And there are consequences that at the end of this talk or this PowerPoint or Word, you can hopefully address and look at your own organization, look at your own design, look at your own work and say, oh, look, do things differently, or no, I don't care. So when we're talking about integrity, quite often, I'm very much into the data and analytics part of it. We are such in a rush to show KPIs, to show something. We're not really 100% sure of what goes into that detail. Is it for including, say, if it's sales? Are you looking at the sales number for the campaign? They probably want you to weave in that people try to pay with their money, but there was some technical problem with their credit card on your website. They tried to act on the campaign, but something happened and then they moved on. So ask yourself, what's actually in, when you're talking integrity of the data, what goes in there? when we're talking about GDPR and retention of the data, how long do you actually need to keep it there? Are you sure you know you're not keeping it for longer with the data minimization and privacy by design? Can you actually live with integrity over what you know, what you gets in there, what doesn't? But also likewise, do you know it's up to date? That's also part of the integrity. How does a user know that there's been a deviation in the reports and that monthly bonus thing that happened in the midst of it has sort of are in integrity right now? Or did you just restore the data and then 3 days later no one actually knows there's been a deviation and the bonuses are actually wrong, but no one knows? Please make integrity of your data a critical thing and look at that. And it's really, really hard. I haven't seen any organization in my 27 years who's actually doing this 100% right. So be kind and humble to yourself that it's hard. It's not just because you see a number. It's true. You need to be very vigilant in saying, okay, what does this actually mean? What goes into this definition? Likewise with roles and understanding who has permissions to see this. When we're talking about confidentiality, for example, it's so easy that you change a role and then suddenly you shouldn't have access to this data, to this system, to this process. But there's been a glitch or another process didn't work. So think about the confidentiality in what you're creating and how can you ensure there's a checksum, there's a process, there's a Paul who actually cares. Quite often it's really hard with this kind of work because you have a manager who has approver and then you have a project manager who needs to get it done. Then they come knocking on the door of help that's saying, hey, you need to add this or something. And then there's someone else approving. And the approver gets once a year, is this accurate? And they just say yes, because it's really hard for them, again, with integrity, to know, is this actually what they need? Quite often it's like I copy this individual's permission because they're going to be similar. And it's no integrity there. Yes, because again, go back, it's urgent, they need to get working, we can't answer all these things, or we don't know because the one who used to know isn't here any longer. So make it some conscious notes. Okay, what does confidential mean from this perspective? How will we know? How can we help to ensure that we know who had access if there was a breach? So we know who can improve this. If the vacations are a great way to test this, to see what happens in different cases. Likewise, especially you probably have you terminate accounts when people are leaving, but look at the role switching, internal promotions and stuff like that, and you'll find it's really, really hard, especially since people quite often want access. There's a benefit. There's power in knowledge. There's power in data. So they probably want it. So look at, okay, well, do we understand the role? Do we have an approver for this? Likewise, I put continuency here in order to get true availability, not just it's green. You also need to be able to say, well, do you have some sort of SecValOps, or do you do continuous testing that this, say, web server is up and running on this port continuously? Do you test that? Do you have an SLA for that? Do you know what your promises actually are? Or do you just say thumbs up, it's good? And then when you have a user reporting differently, you try to figure it out and then restore the functionality. But you're not really putting down a protocol of saying, well, actually, we had a surprise here. And now looking at the protocol, I realize there's a pattern, or it's way too more than we thought it was. That's why in order to get this continuency, you also need to look at how are you documenting your systems. that promise of availability. When it's available, how do we ensure that is? How can you trust the promise to your user? And you cannot do that with, again, sacrificing integrity. I've been responsible for KPIs for most of my consulting lives. All KPIs are a compromise between multiple accesses, a trade-off between this and this. No KPI is the absolute truth. Data is just a representation of something else. You need to document this, and be that lineage within the tool, be that in a Confluence page describing how. Is it decaying results that you're refreshing once a month and then it's slowly decaying compared to the truth? Or is it refreshed every day or every minute live? Or is it the stream that you're not grabbing everything, but you're grabbing? You need to document that so people understand what can they trust in this promise. And as well, what is it for? Why do we have this process in place? What's the outcome? What's the effect of it? How do I know if it's working again with the minimal viable product? The viable part, you need to document that. What makes this work for your user? And how do they know they're using the tool and the process effectively? And quite often that's hard to do because we're so stressed. Yeah, it's working right now. I don't have time to do that. I'll do that tomorrow. Likewise with documenting the process, no tool is in a limbo. There's always a lot of processes around any tool worth having. In data, again, helpful outcome. No tool is better than its support. No tool is better than the manual that you can actually help figure it out with when the power user is gone. And you might not even have a power user. You might not even have training. So, which leads into succession planning. You probably need to understand, again, why are we here? What's our department for? What's my team for? And do I have succession in place? Quite often we don't have time for that, and I respect that. But please think about it. Make a choice. Write about that choice so you know. And even if you can't document all the processes, perhaps just make a note as you go. Something here, something here, something there. Giving this to her so she can, whatever, just make something. Likewise, knowledge management. Don't make this into OneNotes or Notion notes or whatever it is. Make it somewhere where people can find it and search it. Dare to write public drafts on the intranet. That's what I mean with public. It doesn't have to be perfect, but share what you know. Figure out how you can add to that knowledge with comments, and everyone can edit wikis or something like that, because you need to learn together. Because you're living in a fast-changing landscape. Everything is decaying all the time, and you need to add knowledge to that. And again, hopefully with an intent of succession planning to make it easier when people leave, when people go on vacation. Is a great way to ensure that there's an incentive to do that. Likewise with standard operation procedures, that those go very much hand in hand. Can you automate a health check? Can you automate a restart? Can you automate a patch? Can you automate SecVal up so you know, okay, now we have changed this, so we have the test battery is longer. Do we promise an availability on the SLA for this side? How do we check that? Not just check that the service is running, but okay, what's the outcome of the service? And should I make a script that actually tries to log on and check something so we know it's actually working again? What is it for? It's not that I can say it's running, but it's actually that a user can do what they need to do. So always go back to that viable part. Privacy by design, again, something usually so important, really helps so much design become better, but so easy to forget because we're in this rush for availability. But if you get privacy by design right, a lot of other designs fall in place like Lego bricks. So make space for that. Think about privacy. Think about consent. Think about how do we know as an organization. Again, consent is nothing you can handle within a tool. It's organizational wide. If someone revokes consent, you need to remove it from your tool within the time span set. So make space for that. Even if, again, right now with availability, you have this new function you should implement. Really, really important you do that. Likewise, with data minimization, there's a lot of benefits when it comes to performance. There's a lot of benefits if there's a breach. There's a lot of benefits when it comes to so many other things. So again, intentionally, why is this data here? What's the purpose? And again, if you haven't documented this, if you come talking to the law, if you can't say we're only processing this data with these 3 purposes, it's really, really hard to say that thumbs up, I'm following the law. I'm not. So it's important you document stuff like that. When we keep talking about contingency, something I miss and something I see so often is the restorability part. Sure, the backup light is green. Sure, we do backups, but we haven't given any thought to the restorability of it. We haven't done any tests of restoring the system and the functionality somewhere else. So think about that. How would, if there's a breach, if you suddenly got ransomware, if you suddenly, there's a deviation you don't understand, how do you restore? When do you decide it's time to restore? What happens to the rest of the multiverse in your organization if you do restore? Really important things to think about. Again, I see a lot of people getting surprised when it comes to restorability. They thought they had a working backup, but they didn't think about, okay, I got the data back, but I didn't get the settings right. I didn't get the ports right. I didn't get any of the environment things right. So yeah, my app works, but not on that. I cannot go back to that old Windows because it's gone. So I'm restoring something on top of the current window, which doesn't work. So really, please make space for restore tests and look at all these things, data system versions, ports I'm reading right now out loud, rules in the firewall, operations, everything. You need to test this so you're not getting surprised. And that goes back to retention as well. For how long? You might be doing clinical studies, you need to be able to restore things for 10 years. Really, really hard. Then you probably even need to keep the hardware so you know you can restore it and run it. Again, what is that restore test for? So you can repeat that experiment. Look at that thing again. So easy to forget that, sure, I have a tape, but I cannot buy the hardware for it. Think about that. Likewise, when you need to ask yourself, what is the restorability for? Quite often, backup is something that's just working. It's really, really powerful for what it's for. But when I talk to people, especially senior leaders, their number one threat, their number one worry right now is ransomware. And their backup is not protecting them against that. Because the backup agent is running in the same Active Directory, having the permissions to go anywhere on one account. And of course, that means that if there is a breach and someone gets a hold of that, they probably will not wait the flag ransomware and send you a ransom note until they've secured that and removed your ability to restore things. So think about, okay, if I want to protect myself from a user mistake, if I want to protect myself from a house burning up, your backup is probably really, really good. But if you want to protect yourself from ransomware, you probably need to do the backup and thus to restore tests differently. So think about that. So you don't think that my number one insurance will not cover my number one worry. Food for thought. Really important and really scary at the same time. Likewise, when it comes to stuff like this, easy for the admin makes it easy for the attacker. So important to, it might be worth, not super simple for you to make it not worth it for an attacker. Likewise with the backup, it doesn't have to be that easy. You need to think it through and figure it out. It's a big shift, but once it's done, you don't need to think about it again. And it's actually better. Again, it goes back to it's a better design. Likewise, I think we need to look at this too when we're talking about it's an organization that needs to meld with the tool and the trade of the choice. How your processes work is so important, and the organization needs to tap into there and need to adapt to the tools you're choosing to use. And what I've found over the years is that leaders don't drive data quality because it's not their target. You probably have the best boss ever, and they're really good, but they will not understand the data as good as you do, and they will not drive better quality the way you could, because their agenda, their target is probably something else. Likewise, data scientists don't really do organizational change that well. And they need to do that to harvest their new model and the whatever goal they see around the corner. But I find that these two rarely talk the same language. And again, that's why the organization looks like it is. That's why the system looks the way it is. So please try to help them. And of course, we can't help them if we don't decide what is it for. A model is not above its data, but what is it for? And that goes back into doing the relentless tests of the A/B testing. Is it working? Is it still working? Do we have a control group? And also I'm adding to Jay here. You need to do a lot of experiments that you don't know if they're going to work. But to figuring out, okay, this is a really awesome way, but there's an even better way that we wouldn't have thought about if we hadn't done some probing. And here's where automation and data scientists really go together, that you can do so many things at the same time, making it really hard for people to understand, okay, what's actually the cause and effect here. So, and going back to, I'm doing this in one go, and I know it's not perfect, I'm sorry for the rant, but I'd rather capturing it so you might use it than having it in my head, not helping anyone until I talk about this the next time. So because with machine learning and everything going faster and faster and more predictive, more really disrupting things, you need to have the data in. And again, if you have a leader who is stuck in legacy systems because the new cool tool get all the funding and we're going to discontinue that system in a year now, just give it 10 more years, you're still having a lot of data there, making it really, really hard for these models and predictions to work. So again, goes into the design. You really need to make people talk to each other. Might be that awesome machine learning thing you have is generating a lot of revenue, pushing and driving the organization to change. Yet it's only fueled by 2% of the organization's data, because the rest is locked in legacy systems that don't get in love, don't get in the budget, because they are to be discontinued. But as long as they're not actually discontinued, and they're generating revenue, so you're not just pulling the plug. That data don't go in to feed an even better model. So it's so important. And again, this isn't easy. If it were, you wouldn't need this Word document. You wouldn't need to think about it. But hopefully, seeing this in its very crude form helps you look at the pattern that goes on in your own organization. Helps you see, okay, well, if we do this slightly different, or in this project, we'll actually think about a few of these to make the design better. So we don't have to have a panic if there's an incident or a data breach. Or we don't have to work so hard cleaning out the data because we have a mechanism in place to ensure that. And hopefully, again, makes it easier to trust the availability flag or whatever you promise your users or customers. So with that, I hope this helps. Take care of yourself, my friend. Have a great one.